SROA SoundBoard, a podcast for radiation oncology administrators. I'm Tammy McCausland. Dr. Michael Leiter is joining us today. He is an honorary professor of organizational psychology at Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia, and co-author of a new book called The Burnout Challenge. Welcome, Michael.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Could you tell me briefly about your background and how you became an expert on burnout and engagement?
Oh, okay. My background, I had a degree in psychology. Actually, my doctorate work was in clinical psychology, focusing on family therapy. And but I became more interested in sort of workplaces and the family dynamics of what's going on within workplaces. So I was working on some issues like that with a residential mental health facility in Nova Scotia, Canada. And when I read Christina Maslach's first article with Susan Jackson on job burnout, and I said, oh, this is an interesting idea. This fits. And so I phoned up Christina out of the blue and said, hi, I read your article, really liked it. I'd like to come work with you for a year on my sabbatical. And she said, welcome, sure, come on over. And coming on over was from Nova Scotia to San Francisco, but it was a long drive. But she had time to think about a lot. But anyway, after that, we really started doing research on these things, and we've been doing research and writing about the topic ever since.
That's wonderful. So in 2019, before COVID, I actually wrote an article on burnout because it was being recognized as a big problem, and the ICD had done the classification of burnout, and then COVID happened. So where are we now with regard to burnout?
Well, burnout is thriving. It's certainly out there. People are talking about it a lot more. There's been a number of studies have been published during the life of the pandemic that have indicated increases in aspects of burnout, particularly the exhaustion and the cynicism, the personalization part of it. I think there are a number of things that changed about how work is done, both for the people within healthcare, but also just people generally, that have had implications for the things that go on at work that tend to push people towards burnout.
So you mentioned that there's been a change. So what kind, or change or changes? So what kind of changes do you think you've seen because of the pandemic that have changed the burnout?
Well, things have gone, okay, and a couple directions here, and one of which, particularly for people in healthcare, I think there were major things that work towards those three elements of burnout, one of which is exhaustion. Exhaustion is sort of a pivotal kind of definition here. And with exhaustion, it's both for some people in healthcare, not everybody, because some things got sort of put on hold, but for people who were right there dealing with the COVID pandemic per se, workload increased in terms of just the amount of patients to see, the amount of time you needed to be there, the complexity of doing the job with the appropriate protections in place and all of that. So that was certainly an increase in work demand in that kind of way. And coupled with that was the fact that things changed a lot in how work was done. Doctors and nurses and other professionals had to change how they were doing things. I mean, one of which is the infection control dynamics of it, but also how you dealt with this thing, how you treated people, how you actually went through and did an assessment and sort of just providing some kind of treatment and change is hard. Change is a difficult thing. The third is that it was scary. This thing was fatal, particularly at the beginning. People didn't know exactly how much, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of threat. So all those things are working towards eating up your energy. I mean, being anxious is very energy intensive state. So all that sort of ate up people's energy and pushed the exhaustion part of it. Secondly, there's the distancing, both from your colleagues as well as from the patients, as well as when you went home from your family and all these things being closed along the way. The contact with other people really dropped off. And in fact, the good thing to do was to distance from people, when that it certainly pushes along, nurtures the depersonalization cynicism part of it, which is sort of a distancing from work, coupled with the fact that there were the frustrations of you weren't getting the great successes so much with this in the early days, particularly as there weren't effective treatments or anything. But that ties into the third dimension, which is a lack of efficacy or a lack of accomplishment. What healthcare providers really like is to have evidence-based medicine, that there's been rigorous research that demonstrate that this is what you do with this condition. That's where they're comfortable. That's what they're trained to do. That's what they really value. And with COVID at the beginning, I don't know what the heck you do with this thing. And whatever we're doing isn't working. And some of the things, like in terms of how ventilators, whatever, were being used after, well, that's the wrong way of doing things. In fact, you roll people over instead. Who knew? It took a while to get to that. So at the beginning, that part was really what I think over time, as healthcare people started finding out, okay, this helps a bit, this helps a bunch. And then eventually you get vaccinations, and eventually you get some actual treatment modalities coming along. So that sense of accomplishment really started to grow. But at the beginning, it was very vulnerable as well. So when you have all three of that, it pushes people towards burnout, because that relationship they have with their work is all disrupted. It wasn't, people talk a lot about resilience, but the problem wasn't that healthcare providers became less resilient. That wasn't the problem. They were just as resilient as they were before. What happened was the work changed, and their whole connection of them with their work changed. And that's a really different kind of situation. That's where the problem was, and so that was really where people needed to be putting their attention to address this thing.
Do you think that change that came about because of COVID is actually a permanent one, even though we're kind of on the tail end of COVID?
Oh, I think there's a lot of things that did change in a very long-term kind of way. In fact, maybe in some ways not enough change in terms of really being prepared for the next pandemic, because everybody's pretty convinced it's going to happen, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to prepare for it. That was one of the things that also drove sort of the cynicism thing, is that seeing how poorly prepared a lot of healthcare agencies on the government level, as well as institutions on the more immediate level, were for this kind of thing. Because, we've been watching movies about this sort of thing for the past 20 years, and but everybody's going, oh, it's such a surprise. No, this was totally, the whole story was written out and put on screen, and books and everything else. So it was completely, predictable, but the level of preparation was so pathetic. So whether we're going to be better prepared next time around, could be. We certainly know enough to, but people can know a lot and not actually, take the appropriate action.
Why is now a critical time for your book, The Burnout Challenge?
I think it is because the people becoming overwhelmed through the work during the pandemic has become something that's very much in the conversation. It's on a lot of people's minds. And there's still a lot of, when you look at blurbs on what do you do about burnout, to prevent burnout, that are all talking about, well, you should just do yoga, or get more better at time management, or just say no, these kinds of ideas, which completely ignore the fact that the problem is a relationship problem between people and their work. It's not an individual failing. It's not a disease. It's basically how I was set up to do my work is not functioning with the work as it's set up to deal with me right now. It's a relationship problem. And a lot of relationships, a lot of workplaces are acting like a bad boyfriend. They're saying, we've got a relationship problem, and Missy, you've got to change, because I'm not going to. And so that's the rub. That really, work and what happened with the pandemic is that work changed very abruptly. It showed it could change dramatically if they wanted to, if they really had to, but they don't always admit that. And some of those changes actually were for the better. A lot of people ended up with a much better work situation when they were working from home, working remotely, a lot of people ended up in a better situation than they had before. But a lot of, and healthcare, particularly where you had hands-on connection with people, particularly people who were by definition, ill, or you weren't probably dealing with them, it became, but a lot of changes happened in ways that didn't make things better. But changes, the capacity for change is there, and it could be changing for the better.
We almost see a kind of battle going on right now with the Great Resignation and the new old thing about quiet quitting, and you see organizations kind of pushing back against, remote work and saying you need to be back in the office. And in some ways, I think that doesn't make sense. Do you think that it's possible to have the change that we need so that people do have a better relationship between themselves and their
I think it's possible. And again, that's part of why we write the book, is to get the conversation more intensely on that issue about how exactly we make that change. Because as you noted, a lot of employers, they have sort of a lazy approach to management. They say, like, the laziest thing you can do as a manager is decree everybody must come back to work without giving it a moment's thought, without actually saying, well, we need people together to do their creative whatever. Like how? Like, it's not like every moment that you're in a workplace with other people, you're having creative moments. That's not what's happening. Usually you're trying to make it through your day. It's a very, it's just say, well, one rule for everybody. So then I don't have to think about what actually people need or what would bring out the best in each of my people, which will be entirely too much work. So a lot of the management decrees I just see as people they're just not being serious. They're not taking this as seriously as it needs to be, the management role. So that's where, and because right now, see, it's the Great Resignation is not purely a resignation. It was really more the great job shift away from jobs that were put together, designed badly. And we talk in the book about, design issues. What's the nature of good design? Just in terms of something to look at as well as something to live in or work with. And are those characteristics in the way this job's put together? So many are put together in such a clunky way that, it's easy to improve on it. And people, once they got sort of disrupted from their rut, their routine of work, looked around and said, I don't have to go back to that lousy job. There's lots of people looking for people right now. And I can move up because, people still need money. They still need to have a job. And they're moving to other jobs. But they're moving away from jobs that were paying badly, that were treating them badly, that were just setting up things in a less complimentary way, and have improved their situation. It's really putting a pressure on employers to up their game. So I see there's a general movement, but it's going to take a lot of persistence because, it can easily backslide.
So if you think about healthcare specifically, you could think of roles like a nurse or a radiation therapist or even a physician. And, they have less flexibility per se than someone working in an office for a company like Apple, where they can allow, remote work, say in the case of Apple. So what advice would you give to leaders in healthcare to make sure there's a better person match, given they have those constraints? Sorry.
Right. Well, the advice I do give is that there isn't a box full of best practices that you can apply. That each time that people need to be rethinking how their workplaces are functioning. They need to be thinking the process that we talk about is that I like to really think on sort of the work group kind of level. You've got a ward, you've got some kind of a team, an operation, whether it's radiation, oncology, or a medical ward or whatever. And you set aside the time to get the people together and reflect on how are we running things here and how could it be done differently? What are the kinds of things that are sort of the pebble in my shoe that I just sort of feel I come in here, I want to do work, I want to treat patients, and this nonsense keeps getting in my way. And, one big problem for a lot of places, and still is the electronic medical record system, that just takes up too much time, too much diversion. Well, how do we improve that? What are the other kinds of things in terms of forms to fill out and procedures to go through and approvals to get for people to do overtime or some kind of relief staffing when people are out? How complicated is all that stuff? Can we make it less complicated? Can we skinny that down so we're not wasting our time? Because what I find compassion fatigue to be fairly rare, but administrative nonsense fatigue to be very rampant. And that if they can streamline that is the kind of thing that really does help. And just in general, identifying the groups, because you need to collaborate. People need to be talking to each other. The leader needs to be with the people that they're leading to talk about this. They've got to customize their solutions to their situation. That's why there's not a nice little solution box cookbook for people to draw from. They've got to go through the process and think it through. And then they've got to commit to implementing something new, because it's easy to slide back to what you used to do. And so that kind of framework is how you develop a workplace to be a more functional workplace, whichever kind of work you're doing.
So you've just touched on the 3 C's approach in your book about collaboration, customization, and commitment. So you've just talked about them, but why are all 3 needed, and how, when used together, do they bring about change?
They're all needed because it is between the people talking with each other that solutions are found. That one person doesn't have the solution, and also very few workplaces want to just do what the other guy told them to do. Like, if they haven't had the actual process of talking through this and finding how do we identify what are some directions to go, that participation in that is essential part of successful change. So that collaboration process is just part of identifying what to do. And it's much, much more effective than just being told what to do by somebody in a kind of position. And it's just inherent in that, as soon as you get something that people within the group can agree to, that it's been customized to them, because each group has its own unique kinds of qualities. And then the third part is that, groups, a commitment is, all these things are very much stretched over time. A career is a very long-term kind of a thing. People really think of that. They want to have a direction to go. Burnout is a very long-term kind of a thing that sort of settles in, and you find a huge correlation on how burned out people are over years into the future. Like, if somebody doesn't do something about it, it just keeps going, because the work situation, it usually is pretty much the same, and people are the same, and all that, it goes on. So that kind of stuff becomes an important, it's just a lot of endurance, and it takes that kind of process to cut through that. Like, again, I've done a lot of work with work groups, done a lot on just being civil and supportive of each other, as well as getting the work done in a more effective way. And the process is definitely key to anywhere you're making progress.
In your book, you talk about 6 mismatches in terms of workload, control, reward, community, fairness, and values. Can you give an example of a mismatch, or a couple of examples, and why they happen?
Oh, okay. Well, like the community mismatch is one where people enter, people in general, most people, a lot of people, they enter work with a certain, motivation to belong. They want to belong to a group. And it's built into people that's just essential to your survival, to be a member of a group, because humans on their own aren't all that impressive out in the, greater universe, but a whole group of people can be a very impressive kind of thing for anything to have to contend with. It's just part of survival, built in from a very, very fundamental kind of stage. And you want to not only be part of the group in proximity to other people, but you want to be a respected member of that group, because otherwise they may dump you. So you've got status becomes very important. You want to be somebody they care about that. You're an asset. You're not just something they're dragging along out to be polite, because people aren't that polite. So you don't want to go too far down that road. So essentially that, and so you go into work and it can be just a little stuff. Like you say good morning to somebody and they don't actually say good morning back again. They just walk by. You go, what was that? Was that on purpose? Or was that, you offer your opinion at a meeting and somebody just rolls their eyes and shakes their head and go, what's that all about? Was that directed with, did they intend to do, are they telling me something with that? That kind of thing. So there's just little interactions that instead of confirming you and saying, I really appreciate what you are doing here as part of this team, explicitly, like I really appreciate how you chipped in yesterday and came up with these ideas, that kind of thing. People really thrive on that. And just a little, it doesn't have to be a big ceremony or just something like particularly a colleague saying, that was really great what you did, doing your work, acknowledging your competence and your contribution. Those things people thrive on that. So if you have a workplace that's giving you that is, that's going to match with your basic motivation. If you have a work group that's really responding with disrespect or just ignoring you or taking you for granted, that's not matching at all. That's a mismatch. And that will create anxiety. That will create your own distancing from this group because you're trying to protect yourself. You're going to have less occasions where some people are confirming your efficacy and your competence, and that's going to be, and that all those things start pushing you towards burnout because it just wasn't matched up well. So that's that kind of thing is like and it can be just little stuff. It doesn't have to be screaming hissy fits or assaults, but that's pretty awful if it is. But just a little stuff is enough to wear people down in that regard.
Thank you for giving that example. You talk about the medical checkup and the organizational checkup. I think the medical checkup is an analogy for the organizational checkup.
Yeah.
But you talk about the organizational checkup as a useful tool. How does it work, and why do you think it can be an effective tool?
Oh, I think how does it work is that, and I work with organizations now, and actually I'm in the middle of writing a report to one right now on doing this kind of a survey where it's a survey, particularly with a large organization, and the one now is like thousands of people at a healthcare organization. And it's a survey that includes, the mass burnout inventory that we developed to assess, the three aspects of burnout. The areas of work life that looks at the matches and mismatches across the 6 areas. And there's also this social encounter scale in places when you want to look at the social dynamics. You get how often has your supervisor, expressed appreciation to you in the past month? Or how often has somebody been rude to you in the past? Just those little things. What's your experience of social dynamics at work? And then other things, there's the evaluation of electronic medical records, that kind of thing, and how that's working. So you do that, and you do it, and then you're able to identify what's the state of things for the organization as a whole, and you identify the different sectors, the positions, the departments, the elements, and you're able to see where is it things working really well here. And where are they not working well? Because what I find, you do a survey of a big hospital, you're going to find elements that, areas where people are just it's just working great. It's just great. And then you can find other ones where it's not working so great. And you're able to then, you've got an idea that's to compare and contrast, to learn from different areas and apply those lessons elsewhere. But then that whole area needs to be part of collaboration and customization and commitment on that area, because it's basically giving an information base to leadership. The senior leadership is looking at all this. And then it's a tool to send down the line saying, here's where your group was with this survey. And here are some things pointed out. And we have some written comments from people in the group that are giving suggestions about how we can make things better here. And this is, we're going to give you access to some expert facilitation, and your group can start working on what can they do at that work group level to start making better. I mean, the senior leadership can be identifying things on the overall policy level, that could make a difference for the organization. But a lot of stuff gets down, again, because it does have to be customized so much. And even though all working in the same organization, there's a lot of jobs that are just completely different from other jobs. So it's got to be very customized in that way. So it's an information-based. It provides a assessment of where you are, and then when you repeat it in a year or two or whatever, you're able to see, are we moving in the right direction? Are we moving in the wrong direction? Or right now, how did this pandemic hit us? Are we coming out? Are we set back? Are we coming out of this? Are we better for the experience? What's happened there? So it gives you that kind of metric to work from, because otherwise people are often just working from, their assumptions about how the world actually is put together, and they could be wrong.
That's a good point. What key takeaways would you share with healthcare administrators, specifically regarding burnout and your book?
I'd say that the main thing is that they got to locate the problem between the person and the organization, between the person and the job, not within the person. It's even healthcare people particularly like to locate problems within people. That's what they're trained to do and to treat. And so you got to put that aside. This is not a disease. It's not a mental illness. Burnout is not. It is an expression of a really gap between people and their work. And that's a solvable problem. It's a solvable problem, but you got to work with the work situation and the person. You can't just tell the person to go off and get themselves better. They've got to work with flexibility is a very important tool here. As we talked about earlier, the idea of decreeing, in the work from home world, decreeing that everybody must come back to work right now, is no flexibility, and you're going to miss a lot of people. There's going to be mismatches there that are avoidable if you actually did take the time to talk to people and understand what their situation is, and had policies for your first line managers as well as for individuals through the organization. So you can do something different. You could actually do what works for people rather than saying, no, we can't bend on that. Got to be the same for everybody. People are not the same. That means you're not being a real leader. You're not being a manager when you say it has to be the same for everybody. You're just, missing the point.
Are you optimistic that we can see a reduction in burnout at work and better job-person matches?
Oh, that's definitely, yeah, I'm optimistic that can definitely happen. And I think, but it takes some doing. It's not going to happen automatically. It has to really, and it's not going to happen through people just meditating more. It's going to happen through actually developing workplaces so that they actually align better with people. And I think, as I've seen, again, with the, resignation, a lot of workplaces have improved their working conditions and have improved their salaries because they just couldn't get people to come there and work for what they were doing before. And so many people left because they had such a poor situation. So I think that right there has raised the bar on a lot of sectors, particularly in hospitality and somewhat in healthcare. Like everybody in healthcare is scrambling to find enough people to come there. And part of what they're doing is trying to say, okay, well, we'll meet you halfway on this, that kind of idea, which they weren't doing before, So I think that's where I'm optimistic. There's some flexibility there, but we got to lean on it.
Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. It's been a very insightful interview.
Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you for listening to our guest today on SROA SoundBoard. For more information, please visit www.sroa.org.